Thank you so much for coming, and sorry for the delay in starting. We had some technical difficulties. But I'm Dr. Ng. I'm the vice chair of this committee for facilities, and Mr. Hershey, Vice Chair Hershey was not able to be here today, so I'm stepping in. And just to first off, on behalf of Mr. Hershey, I just wanted to thank all the board members for the hard work last week on the robust discussions and the vote on Ligon and the future of Ligon. And I know that there's going to be a lot more work to do in terms of putting that vision into reality. So I look forward to seeing some of that stuff come into fruition in the future years. First, we do have an operations update from Mr. Strickland. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Dr. E. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. The update today is short but relevant. I did talk to Tiffany Lawrence today, and I talked to her last week about sharing some information, and she said, Mark, we're just wide open right now. I don't have anything specific to share. They are wide open right now, but I'll get some additional information from her at one of the upcoming meetings. So I've got some information to share with transportation and M&O. Our bus driver recruitment, which I mention every time, remains strong. We have a dedicated team that meets every couple of weeks to talk about our strategies and priorities. And so we're holding our own right now with our number of drivers. We just had 31 new buses delivered last week, and we'll get 9 more this week. And by the end of April, we'll get 30 additional buses. These are on the replacement schedule due to age and mileage. And 10 of that 30, I think we shared with you all before, will be propane buses. So that'll be an exciting time. Propane is becoming a clean energy source, and the people that we have talked to that have used propane buses like them a lot. There's some challenges with fueling them, but they're a lot easier to work on than a diesel engine, and they are proven to be or to have a good track record. Currently, we have 19 out of 67 open mechanic positions. So I just share that. Obviously, our mechanics keep the buses on the road, and we are always recruiting for those positions as well. I think you all probably know that pay is always an issue as we compete with other entities that are looking for those mechanics, but nevertheless, the buses are being serviced and keeping them on the road. We just have higher than we would want a number of positions open. Mr. Hershey is not here, but he did ask me a question, so I'm going to share out what he asked me to talk about. We all know with the recent world events, and if you put fuel in your car recently, you know what has happened to fuel prices. So we have enough fuel to get us through the end of April right now. At the board meeting next week, there will be a number of strategic realignment items as far as taking funding from areas where we think will be good for the rest of the year, and we're taking that funding and going to utilize it to purchase fuel for end of the school year to get us through the school year. So we're just aligning expenditures with budgets, and all of that will be through our spec ed transportation. So we've looked at where we are with that, and we feel good about that. So that'll be on the board agenda for next week. We are mindful of what's going on with the price. Heard some interesting chatter from DPI about what they are discussing maybe with the legislature and other places, but we'll let that lie until we get some confirmed information. So that's where we are on transportation. And then for maintenance and operations, hopefully with the weather outside, we're basically finished with the heating season. Yes, fingers crossed, which just means that we're transitioning more towards cooling. I think it is worthwhile, relevant, and important to mention that most of the repair work that we are doing right now, keeping systems running, is being done with in-house staff, as our contracted money is very, very limited. So we don't have the flexibility that we have had in years past in terms of hiring outside vendors to do work with us. We did do some work over the winter as much as we could with our chillers, but at this time we're a little handcuffed. If we find that we have some additional funding as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, we will re-look at that and do something different. We do have a few what we term high dollar repairs that are kind of out there and looming around. M&O staff is prioritizing those right now. It could involve the installation of some temporary chillers. So just so you all know, years ago, the last couple, 3 years, as we go through and complete life cycle projects, those chillers are sometimes still operational and in decent shape. They're just older. So we have installed them on trailers, and we can be mobile with those as we need them. I think it is important to note as well that on our newer facilities, we are going ahead and plumbing in the necessary piping to install those temporary chillers so that 20, 30 years from now, when you need a temporary chiller at a school, and we just built it this year, the piping will already be there. So we're prioritizing those repairs to align with our funding, and we'll get through the spring. Staffing levels for unfilled positions continues to be a challenge, and also overall numbers of staff is also challenging. I know that we again have an aggressive plan or outlook to recruit people, and we have a recruiter out at M&O right now. But again, we're fighting basically competitive salaries for what we can provide for compensation versus some other areas. Nevertheless, the work continues on. We will prioritize things as they need to be and get the work done. So I'd be glad to answer any questions, but again, a short update, but I think all of that is relevant information for you all to hear at this time of year.
Thank you, Mr. Strickland. Any questions from anyone? Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Ng. So I know we're transitioning to the hopefully great weather with the spring getting warmer, but have we started the inspections or the process to make sure that all the ACs are working properly, or you can just expound upon that a little bit?
So there are some things that you can check before we actually run them, but in order to fully check them out, we need to have hot weather, we need to run them. But things more interior to the building, such as belts and pulleys and filters, we obviously can do that kind of stuff, but we really have to crank them up. We have to have hot weather to do that.
Ms. Caulfield?
You said, you mentioned a couple of things about the paying with the market. Can you tell us where we are and where you feel the market is? Like how far off are we?
As far as compensation, I can't give you specifics on that. What I can share with you is we're not competitive. If we were, I believe we'd have people beating down our door. Wake County Public Schools is a great place to work. And then I believe that the compensation and salary study, which will be coming at some point in time in the future, will really frame that for all of us, for all of those positions that we're looking at. I don't have specific numbers. I do know last summer, year before, I know, been talking, it was Willow Spring High School. I remember it. There were a lot of people out there from a contracted vendor, and they were making 95. They were qualified chiller techs, and I think we may top out somewhere in the high 70s for our 30-year people. So, I mean, and these were not 30-year people, they were younger guys. So, and that was a couple of years ago, but I think the study will tell us where we need to be.
Okay, that is a pretty big difference between 75 and
It is.
or 77 and 95. And then you said that staffing is also an issue, and I believe that it was somewhat addressed in the past, but can you give us some kind of an update as far as, you said 19 out of 67 mechanics are empty, but, and you don't have to do it now because I know it's probably a bigger answer, but could you give us some kind of tally of where we are short and what we need to be efficient?
Do you want it specifically for transportation and M&O? Would they be the two? We can
Yeah.
get that for you.
That's it right now.
All right, Ms. Evans?
Just a comment. I think it really is important to acknowledge that when you work in the public sector, you're not going to be competitive with private pay, whether it's working for Wake County Schools or the county government or the city of Raleigh or the town of Cary. I mean, that's historic. It's nationwide. I mean, that's, you know, and it used to be that our benefit, and I don't mean for Wake County Schools, but it used to be in the state of North Carolina, our benefits were part of the pool, but yes, you gave up some of the private sector salary, but you got better benefits, and I don't know that that's true anymore, but I just think it's really important to acknowledge that, not to say that I want to see the study as well, so that we can see specific comparisons, but anecdotally, I don't think it's, I mean, I think it's a true statement that when you work in the public sector, it's always going to be below.
And there is something to working for Wake County Public Schools. I mean, we're the largest district in the state, got a great superintendent. Look at that. But there is something for being on that mission of wanting to work and do good for kids. And that's essentially why, you know, we all do this. And so that is a draw. It is an attraction. I'm not sure it overcomes the salary piece all the time. And you're right about the benefits. They're not what they were. But it is a great place to work, and we do hear that. So.
Yeah, I think it's true in all areas of employment. You know, you kind of look at the whole package, not just the salary, right? You also kind of look at your life, you know, the quality of life and all those things that kind of factor into your decision to decide on where to work. So, Ms. Rice, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to, thanks for your report. Just curious about, are we still on track for putting in the chillers? Or I know at some of my schools, I was told when the spring comes, I'm at the spring now, and I want to make sure that we're still on track for what we had already said we were going to do back in the winter.
And I don't remember if is
That would be Enloe.
one of your.
That would be
okay.
Enloe.
Well, I'm happy to say that Enloe is on that list and remains to be on that list. That tower building that we've had so many problems with, it's getting a new chiller.
Okay.
It's a 450-ton chiller, and so.
So my dance students will not be sweating more than just their butterflies that they're doing.
We hope not, but Enloe is definitely on the list, and I can send out an update on that particular one and the others, but yes, we're happy to hear about Enloe.
Yeah, and I just wanted to Ms. Edmonds actually took some of the same thoughts out of me, and this is when we just left out of community engagement, and I think that it's safe to also say the more that we create welcoming environments at every department within our district, that people today have a lot of other social media spaces, to Glassdoor and all these other places, to rate who we are and how people work within those departments, and they share this stuff, and it's like gospel out there, and they're like, we would, but never mind. So I definitely want us to continue to keep doing the great work that we're trying to do around every department is welcoming, that everybody, I'm going to stay with well-being until I'm blue in the face, right? That we're treating people well, and that we are not bullying as adults, and that's just being honest and truthful, that we're mindful of how we treat each other as humans, even when we have bad days. So I think those are some factors, not all factors, but those are some important factors from a clinical perspective and a behavioral health perspective, and the data is always there, and I can pull it if we ever need it. People do not leave jobs, they leave people. Because people will take their resume, clean it up, and go get a same job in their field. They're not leaving the job, they're leaving the organization in which they had to engage, not getting what they needed possibly as a place of belonging. So just want to keep those factors in mind across the board and honestly, thank you.
I would add that I think it's a both and, because we know that salaries and state benefits are much different than what they were many years ago. And so, and as we say, not that we use that as an excuse, but that is a reality. But we also have to recognize that we balance that with how do we create an organization where people want to be. And so I know that as we continue to build that, that's when we're going to need help from the state to say, now that we built this environment, we also need compensation to go along with it. Because at the end of the day, we're never going to be able to compete with private industry, but it is about when you get close enough to it, then we want to make sure that Wake County is the place where people want to choose to be. And I know I've been in districts where people have to go somewhere, they come right back, hey, this is just not so-and-so. So, we appreciate that feedback, but that's what we want to continue to get to.
All right, I'll reserve my last question, but before that, Ms. Culver, you have something?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up. I know, I'm not sure if it was completely answered about how we're going to be more proactive than reactive now that we're switching our weather. Wake Forest Elementary School's been an issue, and we had the HVAC, and that blew up. So I would hate for that to now turn around and be another issue that we have with something like that. You're talking about having a good environment and a safe space for our kids to be. In all of our schools, what are we doing to be proactive now? Because we know spring comes, it's all beautiful, the green stuff comes, and then the heat, and that's it,
And I think that goes back to the question that Mr. Swanson asked, as we shift into a different environment, spring, from winter to spring, all the prep work that we need to go to make sure we prepare those systems to be ready when there's, the warm weather that's coming. And so I do want to share with everybody that while we continue to do that work to prep systems to transition, that we also recognize that when they've sat idle and we turn them on, that they could experience an issue or a problem in X number of days. And I think that Wake Forest Elementary, that's a prime example of a boiler that's working, goes out, that's something that's unexpected, and then you go in and you do the work necessary to either fix it or replace it. And so I think we've been able to replace that in a short amount of time. But I think that is the right question to ask. And Mark, I'll let you add to that, but it is about the prep work that we do. And that's part of the preventative maintenance that happens on systems when they're down and idle, so that when it's time to flip the switch, boom,
So we have a lot of days where we get really hot days, and then all of a sudden the cold comes back. And so I heard you say to Mr. Swanson that it depends, you can't just boost it just to turn it on and test it. But we do have days to test it. So do we do that as part of this setup?
We do,
getting
and
ready
when
for
we begin to
transition?
start up and crank them up. Going back to your question about the preventive maintenance, if you'll, on the board agenda for next week is an increase for a vendor for preventive maintenance. We are doing preventive maintenance, but we're not doing it to the level that we need to. We need to increase that program, but that's going to require additional funding and priorities. But we do preventive maintenance. So we have contracts in place to do that work, which is vitally important. If we could get ahead of some of those types of things, we wouldn't end up with maybe the huge problems that we have at the end where things just don't work. But we are still doing some of that. As I mentioned, belts, fans, things like that. We're out looking at that. We're just not doing it to the level that we should be.
And Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I know we have 203 different schools that have different kinds of systems. And so in some schools, you may have a system that is either on heat or cold, and then at a certain point, you switch it over and that's it. Now, do we still have any?
We have some of those two-pipe systems, that's what he's referring to. But for the longest time, we've been going to four-pipe systems, and that allows you to, it's
Go
not
back
just,
and forth.
it's everybody in the state, because two-pipe was back in the 80s and 90s, and
Yeah.
you couldn't dehumidify, and so it's problematic. So as we can, we're switching that out.
Okay, and then my next part of my question is, I know that the funds are an issue, but getting ahead of it as far as maintenance, you're saying staff is the issue of why we're not,
There are two main things.
okay.
There are staff compensation, and then there's having an adequate number, three things, adequate number of staff to do that work. Then there's funding for the work that we farm out, that we may not have the expertise in. Those are the things that are most critical. I'll use that car analogy again. We need to do a better job of maintaining that, changing the oil and the filters and all that stuff. That's where we need to be,
Okay.
and that's a huge lift.
The other struggle that we had, same school, is that we had the roof repair, which
Right.
I'm sure they're glad to have the roof being repaired in the way it was.
Right.
But it's being done during instruction.
Right.
So do we have more of repairs like that that could be disruptive, that could be
Likely
scheduled
so.
in the summer?
Likely. Well, we do have a lot of work that takes place during the summer, obviously, but we can't do it all during the summer. And we pay a huge premium, as we said to the vendors, you've only got to work at night. You only can work at night or after the school day, because that translates into having people work after hours. There would be lighting involved, and so people put roofs on during the day because that's when you need to do it.
Do we pay a premium if it happens like during the summer or winter break?
No, I would not. I'm not aware of that, no.
So much of that, Mrs. Caulfield, is going to be based on, one, when a company bids on a project, and then two, when we are able to schedule that. And so I've had roofing projects to occur every year of the month, January through December. And it just really comes down to when they bid, when they can schedule it, and then how broad the project is.
And the type of roof.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
you- only certain roofs you can put on during the warm months.
Yeah.
Or you should put them on during the winter months.
Yeah. And so thinking about replacing a high school roof versus an elementary roof, the time that it's going to take to do that is going to vary. And that could overlap into a time where students are going to be in school. But I've just seen it all 12 months of the year. Depends on the scope of the project and when they're able to schedule.
Okay, and then I know, one last thing if I could, I know that we talk about the priority list, and I know that we've met about that often. I think it would be helpful if we could bring that back, and we can talk about how we prioritize the schools. I know we've done it in the past, but it's helpful right now, you know, especially in my district. I've been approached the last couple of weeks for quite a few of my schools that they don't understand why the priority list keeps juggling. You know, and we do have plenty of conversations around the 203 schools, but I think it would be helpful to have something come back as a presentation to
We
say
can do that.
the things that would affect that and why some schools may not see them rising to the top of that list.
We can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a very heavy agenda today, so I'm just going to go ahead and move forward with approval of the February 2026 facility meeting. So, Mr.
Second.
Swanson, Ms. Rice got second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So it's been unanimously approved. Next, we will go to the CIP bond information. We have Ms. Emily Lucas from Wake County come to speak with us.
Hey, good afternoon, board members. Thank you so much for having me today. It has been, believe it or not, almost 4 years since we contemplated a school bond. And so we gave a presentation last month to our board members about the bond process, and we wanted to come today to the Facilities Committee to give you all an overview of the process. So this discussion is not intended about what's in the bond, but more about what the bond process is. And I don't know who is controlling the slides. Thank you. Next slide, please. All right, some key messages for today's meeting. So As we contemplate a 2026 schools bond referendum on the November ballot, the Board of Education actually is the first board to take an initial action or step. So we want to make you all aware of that step and what that is. It does take about 6 months to complete all the steps to get ready for a bond. So you think it's November, it's way a ways off, but when you take into account early voting, absentee ballots, things that we have to get approved by various agencies, it actually starts a lot earlier. The key dates for all of these deadlines are based on the Wake County Board of Elections and their needs for ballot preparation, as well as review and approval of the proposed bond by the local government commission. Next slide, please. So some things that are already underway, which you're well aware of, is that continued refinement of the 7-year CIP, and I believe you have an update on that today as well. That happens at these meetings, your board meetings, and through the core team. And then also some actions that will be coming up later this month and early in April. We will be giving a presentation to our Board of Commissioners about the full 7-year CIP, so that would include the schools, Wake Tech, and then county projects. And then based on what we showed them as a model of a debt and capital forecast, if they're okay with that, we'll begin some internal actions before we get first sort of board official actions coming in May. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, the first official action is by you all, and that would be scheduled to take place on May 5th. And so in this, if you've been here before or approved this before, it is a resolution that requests that the county funds 2 years of school funding. So this would be fiscal years actually 28 and 29, because you all have already requested funding through fiscal year 27. And that for a certain amount of that funding that we as the county go to the voters to ask for a general obligation bond, which essentially puts the full faith and credit of the county and its property taxing power to pay for the bonds. I've outlined some other steps here. The blue ones represent county board actions, and then the sort of gray ones are staff actions. So assuming that you all pass a resolution on May 5th, that gets handed over to the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners then takes action on May 18th, and they say, yes, we agree with these findings from the school board, and authorizes staff to go ahead and submit an application to the LGC. You can see we have a lot of documents that we have to prepare and some actions later in June. We introduced what is called a bond order. So this is a resolution that, again, sort of reinforces these are the things that we believe are necessary for school construction and renovation. In this case, we will also have a bond order for Wake Tech public improvements as well. We have to prepare some disclosures that go to the LGC about how much the debt is proposed to be, how much the debt interest would be, with some assumptions about what the interest is, and establishes the referendum date. Next slide. So just some reminders of what is contained in the Board of Education's resolution that we would request that you adopt on May 5th, that the series of improvements that you need for the time period of fiscal year 28 and 29 are necessary construction projects, renovations, and improvements to maintain adequate school facilities. Obviously, again, through our collaboration with the core team, everything that your staff brings to you through updates of the CIP are things that we have all generally agreed upon are needed improvements. The estimated total cost of these improvements for fiscal years 28 and 29. And then again, what is different about this year's resolution is the specific ask to fund a portion of this with a general obligation bond. Next slide. So our board continues work into July. We officially have a public hearing, or we'll have a public hearing on July 6th. This will be an opportunity for the public to come speak either for or against whether or not we put a bond question on the ballot. But then the board will vote whether or not to do that. We assume that that happens. So then we hand over by July 9th a copy of the resolution calling for the referendum. It will have the ballot language that's on it. And so then we do begin a series of publications of notices to the public. And then August 10th, we will plan to go to the local government commission That will be county staff. We will have school system staff to be there to speak in more detail about some of the renovation projects or construction projects that are slated for those 2 years, and not mentioned on here, but we'll have Wake Tech staff there as well, assuming that we have a Wake Tech bond on the ballot. So just some key dates, again, related to the election. So again, backing up to when they have to have everything ready. September 4th is when absentee voting begins. So we have to, that's when we back into that like July date that we have to hand something over to the Board of Elections because they have to start printing ballots very early. Registration deadline for voters is October 9th. Early voting will take place the last 2 weeks of October. There's a deadline October 20th for absentee ballots, and then, of course, November 3rd is Election Day. Next slide. Just some communication reminders. This is something we prepared for our Board of Commissioners, and of course, always feel free to consult with your legal counsel. But some things that we remind ourselves of and our elected officials is what we can say or what we can't say. We, of course, want to encourage everyone to vote. Go and vote early if you have an opportunity or if that's your preferred method. We can provide facts about the referendum. So again, we can go to meetings and talk about what projects are slated for the bonds, how bonds are paid for, all those types of things. We can certainly encourage people to, again, exercise their right to vote on the referendum. It'll be a good reminder this year, just to note, we have some local elections in the city of Raleigh. We have multiple jurisdictions that may have referendum questions on the ballot. We have midterms. So our ballot questions for both schools and Wake Tech may end up on the second page. So it's always good to notify people about, hey, don't forget to flip over your ballot and vote the whole thing. But the one thing that staff and elected officials cannot do is actually say, vote for the referendum. We cannot use local dollars or taxpayer dollars to advocate one way or the other, which is why we have the list of external organizations up here. These are folks like the Chamber of Commerce, your local, probably your PTAs, Wake Ed Partnership, others. They can certainly advocate to vote for the referendum once it's on the ballot. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. It's very helpful to get that kind of calendar and walk it back and understand, what the time frame it is for us to get our work done, to have that communication with you all. First, the question is, can you describe the LGC? And you mentioned that a couple of times.
Yes, so the North Carolina Local Government Commission, that we kind of refer to as the LGC, they are an oversight body that is established by the state. I could go back in the way history. They actually started, I think it was the 1930s, like when we had like the Great Depression and everything. All these cities and towns were failing, and so the state decided they needed an oversight body to make sure that local governments were doing things like creating balanced budgets, planning for debt, and having a way to pay for debt. And so when we are to go out for debt, and in this case, this starts with the referendum question, what they like to see is, have we been successful before? Have we gotten projects done like we said we would on previous referendums? Obviously, in this case, to make sure that we've paid our debt in Wake County, that's not an issue. We plan very well. And then other things. So have we had any findings in audits or things like that? So they do sort of a year-round review of local governments. We are AAA rated by all three bond rating agencies. That speaks very strongly for the economy that we're in locally, that we are very fiscally responsible. So those are the types of things that they monitor in this process.
So, and generally speaking, what's the makeup of this
Could you try again?
committee?
Can you speak?
What is the makeup of this committee in general?
Yes, so the Local Government Commission is a group of appointed officials from across the state. There are some folks that sort of sit on this board all the time, so the state auditor, the state treasurer, the secretary of state, and then they also have some appointed folks who represent local governments from across the state.
So, Ms. Lucas, could you also share some about how the LGC looks at the amount of debt that an organization can take on? Because we may want to do a $20 billion bond, but they say you don't have that much credit. So.
Correct. So there are a number of metrics that we monitor. Really, the first point of that is that we want to make sure that we maintain a AAA rating from the bond agencies. And so they look at things like debt to assessed value. They look at, in any given year or over a certain period of years, how much of your capital program are you paying in cash versus debt? You don't want to become too leveraged in debt. Just sort of think about your own household finances. You don't want to do that. They do look at sort of the size of maybe the total referendum that you're going out for. In this case, we will, probably have, between Wake County Public Schools and Wake Tech, we're looking at somewhere probably in the $800 to $900 million range between the two programs. We also have to be mindful of what are the voters willing to take on and accept this debt. So those are some of the metrics that we look at. We also, one other one is we also try to make sure that 70% of our debt is paid down within 10 years so that we can take on more debt to continue these building programs.
Any questions from other board members? Ms. Coffey?
Can you talk a little bit more about, you mentioned the bond and the interest, and how it affects our taxpayers?
Yeah, so when we have the bond order and when we have the ballot question, and this is something that's a little different than from 4 years ago, a few years ago, the legislature made some changes in what the ballot question looks like. So it will, number one, it will say, like, what is the amount of the bond? And then it makes you sort of assume what I'm going to call an artificial interest rate that you would potentially pay over the life of the bond. And then, so you also have to represent not just the amount of the bond, but the total that you will pay back in principal and interest, so to speak. The calculation that they use is very conservative because they wanted a law or legislative action that was representative statewide of what people who have different bond ratings might pay. So I'm going to think it's somewhere around 5%. Wake County is a AAA rated agency. We see interest rates sub 2%. So, we're in a different environment than 98, 95 other counties across the state, but we still have to conform to state law and use the formula that they've set forth.
Okay, and you mentioned a 10-year. You said 70% has to be paid back in 10 years.
We use that as our own metric that helps us maintain our AAA rating with the bond agency, but also by paying down debt in sort of a prescribed way, it allows us understanding that, construction, renovation won't stop for the school system, construction and renovation won't stop for Wake Tech. We will have, for the county, we will have future park needs, library needs. By us paying down this debt in a measured way, it allows us to then come back and say, what are the next round of projects we need?
So if we were, just using the 10-year, just so I can understand, if we're using this 10-year, like rule of thumb, it sounds like what you're saying, we just had a bond that was passed last time, so is that 10 years?
No, the last time we had a bond was 4 years ago.
I meant the last bond that we passed, the library bond, right?
In 24, yes.
So is that something that has to get paid back in the same time period, or is that something separate from us?
They're separate, but we do look at our program holistically. So we look at our library debt, we look at our school system debt, or our debt for our schools, we look at the debt for Wake Tech. The other thing to take into consideration, so one thing to think about with the library bond, so the library bond was approved in 2024, but we haven't even spent all that money yet. So we haven't actually taken on the debt. The debt doesn't get taken on the day the voters approve for it. It gets taken on as we complete the projects in the bond. So the library bond, for example, we have a 6-year plan to do all those library improvements. So some of that debt won't come on and start for 6 years, but our goal is to holistically holistically be paying 70% of our debt over 10 years.
Similar to an equity loan, correct? And you pay on what you take.
Yes.
And then my other question is, you said July 6th is public hearing. Is it typical that we would do it? I'm just saying that week, I know is a big vacation week, so if that's the week that we're choosing for public hearing, it's the like year-round transitions, I know traditional's off, is it typical that we would, I mean, for public hearing, I just see a concern with that.
So
We
that
won't
is,
have that many.
in prior years, when our board, that is an action by the Board of Commissioners, and this has typically been the time of year that they do it. And again, we've got to get information into the Board of Elections by a certain date, so we're working to meet that date. So we couldn't really push it to August because we wouldn't be able to meet the Board of Elections date.
Right. Is it possible, and I don't know, Dr. Taylor, if you can answer this, or if this is something that the board has to choose, that we would allow online?
Again, it's a Board of Commissioners public hearing, so it is completely at the
So
discretion.
we don't have public comment here, it's at Board of Commissioners
Yes.
office? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the next on the agenda is Mr. Ramey, talking about stop arm and speed zone cameras. Exciting topic.
Yes, thank you. So Mr. Strickland's asked me to come here to give you all a kind of overview of some legal issues that need to be sorted through if you all decide to pursue these programs, and also a status update on our communications with the county attorney's office on this so far. So I'll try to keep this high level, but slow me down if you have any questions. There are statutes under North Carolina law that allow school systems and counties to jointly establish and operate two types of programs that may be of interest to you. One is for stop arm cameras that are mounted on the stop arms of your school buses. They record people who illegally pass the school bus. The person gets fined, the fine's collected, there's a law enforcement review process, and eventually the proceeds, or most of the proceeds, flow to the public school system. Similar program called Automated School Safety Zone Programs works the same idea. It's cameras that are installed in the slopes, in the school zones, right in front of the school, and if somebody's illegally speeding in excess of the school zone, same process where the camera records it, and the fine gets issued, and proceeds flow to the school system. But the statutes don't, you can't just do it. You can't, this is not something you can just start up on your own. So here I want to kind of go over some of the preconditions, the steps you would need to do to establish one of these programs. First step is the county, it's not the school board, but the county government has to actually have an ordinance authorizing civil enforcement by the cameras. So we can't do this at all without the county's cooperation and involvement. Next step would be an interlocal agreement between the county, the school system, and the sheriff's department that kind of describes some details about the program, including provisions on cost sharing and reimbursement. So the idea, in theory, the way these programs would work is that it's revenue neutral. It's going to cost some money for the cameras and for the staff who manage it. You have to have a law enforcement officer who actually reviews the citations. You can't just cite people based on a camera review. But the idea is that all of that's recouped from the fines that are collected from the people who are violating the law. And then the extra money goes to the public school system per the state constitutional requirement. The fines and forfeitures flow to the public schools. And that's the idea. It's got two main goals, dual goals. One is to deter dangerous activities, right? You're creating a deterrent to keep your schools and your students on buses safe. And the second goal is to collect revenue, additional source of revenue for the school system for those that aren't deterred. Right? So you have two advantages from it. Another requirement, so I mentioned the ordinance, an interlocal agreement, and then the third requirement that you would need to have one of these programs is a written contract between the school system and the vendor that supplies and services the cameras. And these are basically all done through contracts with a third party. So those are the kind of three key elements. Now, up until about May of last year, the statutes allowed these programs, as I described, but they were pretty much unfeasible. They didn't work. And the reason was there was a court case, a court of appeals decision, the Farrington case that said that interpreted the law to require at least 90% of the proceeds of the fines had to go back to the school system. And the case that came to the Court of Appeals was the interlocal agreement had 70% of the costs going to the school system and 30% reimbursing all the various costs of the collection. And the court said you can't do that. So that pretty much made it unfeasible. I'm not aware of any school districts that got these things up and running, except the one that got struck down, because it's just 10% was not enough to fund the program. The good news is last May, the North Carolina Supreme Court overturned that decision. And they reasoned that the 10% limit was modified by some other statutes. They also pointed out, I think quite logically, it wasn't really a choice between whether the school system gets 70% of the proceeds or 90%. It was whether they get 70% or 0%, because it's not feasible to run the program at a 90% reimbursement rate. So anyway, that barrier has been cleared. I think these programs are now feasible. And so at Dr. Taylor and Mr. Strickland's direction, we initiated conversation with the county's attorney's office. It's preliminary stage, but we just wanted to float the trial balloon, explain that, some of the legal steps that would need to be undertaken, because we would absolutely need to work with the county attorney's office to get this done. So those were good conversations, just preliminary. My colleague Josh Renz, who you may know, is kind of taking the lead for us. He and I have had some good discussions with them. But basically one of the things that they asked us, I thought quite reasonably, was, does your school board support this? And we said, well, we haven't gone to the board yet. We're trying to sort of lay the groundwork for it. But I do think we're at a place now where if you all are interested in staff and attorneys spending more time in pursuing this, it might be helpful to get some direction from this committee. I don't know that we need a board resolution necessarily right now, but if the committee is willing to say, green light, go forward, I think that would help us to sort of spur things along. I'll also give Dr. Taylor and Mr. Strickland the green light that they can go ahead and start communications with the county manager's office as well. So that's kind of where we are on this. I can talk about the mechanics of how the fines are collected if you're interested, but that's the basic update.
Chair Swanson?
Thank you, Dr. Ng, and thank you, Mr. Attorney Rank and Mr. Strickland and Dr. Taylor for bringing this forth. I know when Chris and I, when Mr. Hagan and I were in leadership, we got approached about this many times, and it was grateful to see that this is now starting to take some turn into fruition, because it's all about keeping students safe, especially knowing that we can't necessarily control every crosswalk that is there, but if someone knows there's a school zone or they violate a stop bus arm, it's keeping our students safe. And so I'm looking forward to figuring out how we can make this work, because I know that we have met with some vendors that came from Miami-Dade to speak with us about this. And of course, knowing that once the bidding process goes out, no one can have those conversations. But again, it was shifting it back to staff, because it's up to staff to determine what those conversations look like. But I do think this is something we should address and move forward with, as long as there is some partnerships with this. And I would say, I know in Cary, we've been having these conversations around West Cary Middle School crosswalk and figuring out how to partner with the town to ensure that we're keeping kids safe, especially given the fact that the weather is a little bit better now. And kids, we have a walking policy that encourages students to go out and walk. And so we want them to be safe and do what is best. And also shifting public behavior around, human behavior around school zones. So I do think that's a way of some accountability. So I'm in favor of it, but
And if I may, I'm glad Mr. Swanson mentioned a bid process. I forgot to mention that too. The other direction I've had from Dr. Taylor and Mr. Strickland, because you all may have seen this, there's some people who are pretty aggressively marketing these programs. There is more than one company that does it, and they all want your business, obviously. And that's fine. Somebody will make some money off this. They'll get a fair percentage of the proceeds to run the program. It's not a required to be bid program under North Carolina law, because it's really a service, not purchase of goods. But our guidance would be that to stick with what Dr. Taylor's already conveyed and Mr. Strickland's already conveyed. You want a competitive process. You want to get the best deal that's out there, not the first person who knocks on the door and gets a meeting with someone, right? So what staff have been saying, is trying to reinforce with the vendors who reach out, is we're not there yet. We need to interlocal agreement. We need an ordinance from the county. Our attorneys need to work with the county attorney's office. Once we get there, we'll have an open process for everyone to submit proposals. So if you are contacted by folks, I encourage you to refer them back to Mr. Strickland, and he'll continue saying that same thing he's been saying for a while.
Two questions. So the limitation that you described where it wasn't feasible, that was specific to North Carolina?
Yes, it's really, it was a court interpretation that really was the barrier. So the Court of Appeals had interpreted this other statute requires at least 90% of, certain programs to go to the public school, and of course, that really doesn't apply, so they cleared that path.
But it was specific, meaning it's up and running in other states.
Yes,
It was a
and-
North Carolina roadblock.
This was a North Carolina
for a while.
decision, North Carolina roadblock. yes.
Okay, and then my second question is, are you aware of any problematic issues such as red light cameras? Because I know there were a lot of problems with red light cameras, and municipalities, counties did away with those. So what are you hearing from districts that have this up and running about,
So
or are you hearing?
Yeah, I don't
That
know.
might be more for,
Yeah, I'd let staff, I'm not aware of clients of ours that are currently doing this. Again, look, we've had lots of inquiries, but until about a year ago, we all concluded it wasn't going to work because of this 10% requirement.
And I do know that there was another county that engaged in a pilot program, and this was, I want to say back in 2020 or 2021. The General Assembly had put about, I think, maybe $25 million towards it, and this district engaged with a company that essentially purchased the equipment in terms of the stop-arm camera, the GPS system, but ultimately they got most of the funding that came from it, and the district was fine with it. So I was aware of that pilot that was out there, and again, that was a few years ago. But the conversation that we've had is that when these companies come in and put this in, the revenue is really high in the beginning, but then it goes down over time because people, and that is the idea.
Right,
So
right.
some of what I've seen is presentations where you got this huge revenue, but I know that's not lasting. But that was the one pilot that I was familiar with, but I don't know if any
And
of
it's ended, it
Yeah.
stopped.
Yeah, so.
One other thing is, I'm not sure exactly what reference in terms of problems with red light programs. If there's concerns about whether they're fair and accurate to the people who are fined, one thing that's important is it's a statutory requirement that you have a law enforcement officer reviewing that it can't be based just on the camera or computerized. It has to be an actual LEO putting eyes on it, and there's an appeal process. So they get written notice and they can appeal. So there's a due process component.
Ms. Swanson, did you have a response to Ms.
I
Edmonds?
did. Thank you, Dr. Ng. I know I've spoken to a couple of municipalities that I represent in my district that was all for this. However, with the red light camera, it was their interpretation. They did not want to be the middle person collecting the fees and then dishing it to the school system. So if there is a program that allows the school system just to receive the dollars without them being in the middle, they were open to that. And that was something that the red light cameras, I think,
One of the problems.
convoluted that process.
Ms. Rice?
Yeah, to Ms. Evans' point and to mine as well about, I would like a little bit more information. I hear what our chair is saying and possibly proposing. I'm not quite sure, honestly, how I feel about how we'll do this process and what it looks like. I get we're trying to change human behavior, so to speak. I'm just curious a little bit more about what that's going to look like. A lot of people in community, I'm in the Raleigh area. The red light photo thing was very disliked amongst community, just being honest. It was, and I know Chair gave reasons for what the problem is that they stopped, but that program was not something that was liked among many citizens and very agitating around doing that particular program. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it, to support it or not. I would love a little bit more community feedback than to take something that huge, that's a whole county-wide situation, and that we 9 people make that decision on it alone without community feedback. And I don't know what community feedback may look like or even gathering it. I know we can never please everybody, but I'm just a little concerned about that.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could address that, and that is a valid point. One of the things we already do is collect data on the number of people that pass stop school buses, and so we have to report that to DPI every year. I don't know if we're at that collection period or not, but that's one of the things that we have to do. The other is there are different processes or programs. So some have the stop arm camera, but others have what they call safe school zone. So the process of what they're trying to accomplish is very different in those. And it will also depend on the company as well. So kind of what I've seen is the idea of safe school zone. It is about changing behavior. But I'll say some stop on camera companies, it could be about let's get in and collect as much revenue as we can, and then when it goes down, we go away. And so that's all the parts that we're looking at, but ultimately it is about if there's anything that we can do to mitigate people from passing stop school buses. And so in all transparency for a school district, it is about how we lower that number. But for many companies, there is the idea that until you get to that point, there's revenue that you're going to be able to collect. And so that's what we've got to balance out. But I think the one difference is that running red lights, people view that differently than passing stop school buses with the arms extended. And I think that's where we're going to find more people willing to support this kind of program versus red light. This.
All right, Vice Chair, follow up, please. So, I'm not quite sure when you're going to bring this to us, but before you do, me personally, whether you send it to me in an email, I need the data.
Absolutely.
I need to see the data. I would have liked to have had the data today. If this is what we're coming with to be presented, I need to see how many accidents are we having where children are being harmed. Do that, because if that's the purpose is to prevent harm, show me how much harm has been done, how many people are running. I mean, I certainly don't want people running bus stops, and I've seen people do it, granted, but I still want to see the data on it.
And I think that will probably be the most alarming part, is the number of people that pass stop school buses. And remember that when we collect this data to send to DPI, it's a moment in time. And so just imagine if we did it every day, then you're going to see a huge difference. And I absolutely like the idea of the data, because what I can tell you is when I talk to a particular company, I challenge the data. I said, you're telling me the revenue can be this. I already know different. And so it is about making sure that, one, when dealing with a company, everything for me is not about the revenue. I do know that that possibility is there, but it's also about how do we develop a program that's going to change behavior. And I think that's what people would see in terms of the data about who passes stop school buses. It is, I think, very alarming data.
Can you define the snapshot that you're talking about?
Yeah, so when DPI asks that a district collect that data, it's done in a very finite period. It might, and Mark, I
Yeah, it's not
maybe one or
year-long.
two
It's
days.
a small window where we just grab a small sample size. It's not a year-long data set.
So when we say that though, can you put a number to it? Is it 30 days? Is it 60 days, 90 days? I
don't know the exact period.
Okay.
We'll get the information.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I agree
That's all.
with Ms. Rice. I think we need some more information before we can move on with the conversation. But we have some other people who had questions. Dr. Joe?
So if I'm hearing this correctly, like we take out the middleman with this because if you do this, you automatically get a citation.
Sort of, you do have to have a law enforcement officer reviewing the camera footage to
Okay.
issue the citation. So it has to be a joint operation between the county, the school system, the sheriff's department.
Okay.
And I was surprised, but the statute actually allows any of those three to actually issue the citation, believe it or not. The
Oh,
school
okay.
system can issue the citation, but I think it'd be more sensible to keep law enforcement functions in law enforcement in an interlocal agreement.
But it could just be someone from the sheriff's department. We don't have to get
Correct.
all municipalities to sign on in order to do this.
I believe that's correct. That's a good question, and I'd have to check whether any local ordinance would come into play, but in general, that's the way I read the statutes, yeah. One thing, too, I forgot to mention, but I just want to be really crystal clear on is, no one's asking you to approve a program that doesn't yet exist, right? The only thing, if you're willing to do it now, would just be a green light for us to be able to say that this committee is interested and would like to get more information to come back to the full board. I think that would get us more traction in conversations with the county than me saying, I think the board is interested, I know the superintendent's potentially interested. If we can say that the facilities committee, would like to see if we can get this off the ground, do you guys think we would be willing to work on that ordinance? Then we could come back at a board meeting or work session with more
Yeah,
information.
we'll definitely bring it back to a work session, so we can have a discussion with the full board, and we can do that, that won't be a problem.
Yes, thank you. In the same vein, in requesting data, could we also receive data on districts that are currently utilizing this and what their before and after statistics were?
So we would have to talk to people external to North Carolina, because as I said, there was only one district that was using it, and I don't know, what data exists, but we can talk to various vendors, and they can give us data on the districts that they're working with. So yeah, we can do that.
I can also check with we have a listserv for North Carolina school attorneys to see if any of the other 150 districts, none that I'm aware of, but there might be somebody out there. So
But they
What's
stopped.
the other district?
Dr. Taylor was saying, we probably need to go outside the state because the court case had made these programs pretty much unfeasible. But it's possible somebody has got one off the ground somewhere in the state that Dr. Taylor and I are aware of right now. So I can send an email to our school attorney list or check with other attorneys.
Ms. Crawford, do you have a quick question?
Yeah, I'm all for the school safety zone, and it's a shame that Mr. Haggerty's not here, because I know when we went to the School Board Association, we were both in the same one, so we kind of split. I said, all right, well, I'll go over that one, and he took some notes to share with us, so I'm sure he'll have some pretty good insight. And I did speak to somebody with one of these, one of the companies, I think you did as well. I think the whole idea was to lower, like the accountability will raise awareness and lower the amount of incidents, and that was kind of like the idea. And if I'm mistaken, correct me, that the whole idea behind this is that the revenue covers the program,
Yep.
so we get the safety without the cost of doing it.
Right.
So yeah, the data is helpful, but I think the way they had listed it out sounded like it would be very effective and not something that would cost us something, would just be more efficient with that.
Yeah, if it's set up correctly, it shouldn't really cost anything. It should just be a source of revenue and also a deterrent. Mainly, I think that the goal would be deter people from putting your kids at risk, but if somebody does violate it, you have a better system to catch it and collect the fines, which go to the public sources.
So, Mr. Ramey, you're asking us as a committee today whether we want to proceed with more investigating of this?
I am, but not pushing it, and to Dr. Sotto's point, if you all prefer to come back to a work session for that conversation, that's
So
perfectly
we'll
fine.
bring it back to a work session to
Yeah.
have greater discussion, but what we wanted to do today was just to bring this for the board's awareness, so you could know that this is something that we explored, that there is a possibility to both mitigate safety in these zones, but at the same time, be able to capture revenue as well. And so we're going to continue exploring, because as Mr. Ramey said, a lot has changed with legislation in terms of what you can and can't do. What I can tell you is that where the pilot existed before, it was essentially structured where the district could get equipment, but capturing the revenue, it just never really happened. But the district was okay with that, because they said, we just really want the equipment, because you can get cameras that are on the bus that we have to pay for now. You also get the stop arm camera, so that's sort of the carrot that they will put out in front of you. But ultimately, when you have the right legislation, then you're in a much better position to craft and develop a program with a vendor that's going to benefit you and create the safety that you're looking for, and not that they get everything and we get a couple of cameras on the bus.
Yeah, so I think it's wise that we bring it back as a work session.
Absolutely.
Yeah, especially with several members not here, that makes sense, and I'm happy to come back to the work session.
Yeah, and by then you should have more questions answered.
Sure. Yeah, if you have any questions, collect them up, send them to us by email or whatever, happy to address them.
Thanks, Mr. Ray.
Yeah, thank you.
And next we have, let's see, updated 2027 student membership forecast. for the Ms. Pulliam and Ms. Jordan.
Have to remember that.
Officially presenting Dr. Ng and everybody on the committee, thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you our current student membership forecast. I have with me today some colleagues from our whole team that's been working on this, so I'll let them introduce themselves before we get started.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me. I'm Chris Dick. I'm the president of Demographic Analytics Advisors and do a lot of work with Carolina Demography on forecast.
I'm Nathan Dollar. I am Director of Carolina Demography at the Carolina Population Center at UNC Chapel Hill, and I'm also a WCPS as a parent.
Lindsay Davis, Senior Budget and Management Analyst with Wake Government, and this is my second or third time around with them, so glad to be back.
So thank you for this opportunity. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide.
Do you have the presentation?
You should have it in your materials. Sandy, can you release it to them now?
I think we have it.
I don't see it.
Yeah, ours is listed. The CIP.
Are we okay to proceed while we? So the goals for today's session are to receive an overview of the purpose of the student membership forecast, review the process that we use to develop the forecast, and then, of course, get to the good information. What is the forecast telling us about the next 10 years? And then, obviously, have an opportunity for y'all to ask questions. Next slide. So to start with our overview, we'll go with our strategic plan alignments. It is aligned with our equity-focused practices as a district here in Wake County Public Schools, particularly AIM 14 and differentiating our resource allocation. This information helps to guide that work. And then our effective operations services and facilities, particularly AIM 17 and 20, just to make sure that the resources are available in the proper locations to conduct the work and business of the district.
And then I will take over to talk about the collaboration effort between our three groups. So staff from Wake County Public Schools and Wake County all work together to collect data along with Carolina Demography and Demographic Analytic Advisors. That's a tongue twister.
You are trying to locate.
We can't, it's not on.
Only a couple of us have access to this entire agenda point.
Yeah, your item is not listed.
I got it.
Did you log in this?
I'm logged in and I don't have it.
Okay. No, I mean, I can follow them.
I'll log out and log back in.
Trying to figure it out because I didn't see it either, and I'm logged in, so I don't know why it's not
Yeah,
there.
the next thing we have is the CIP summary update. Thank you.
Both of our presentations should be in the same location. We saw them in the login versions. You as board members are supposed to have access.
Yeah, we don't have it.
Yeah, I don't.
Follow this way.
Might be a glitch because people are logged in and they have it, some do, some don't. I
I
don't know
logged out
why.
and logged back in.
I did too, yeah.
All right, I'm sorry.
You can follow this way.
Are you okay?
Okay. So staff from the school system provides information about student membership and enrollment trends, including information about charter school enrollment. Next. And then Wake County government uses that enrollment information and student assignment data to incorporate into our county budget development materials. Wake County government planning and inspections also contributes data related to home sales, permits, and things of those nature. That, next slide, helps feed into data that Carolina Demography and Demographic Analytic Advisors use along with planning information from municipal agencies to bundle all together. Next slide. So that we can integrate that data while assessing it against trends that we are seeing. There is some really cool stuff with predictive modeling and stress testing that is fascinating to me. And then once all of the scenarios and forecasts are kind of run through and validated, we then come and present it to the Board of Education and the Board of Commissioners. And with that forecast, we look at capacity management, CIP calibration, and budget development for both organizations.
And I'll pause here and you'll see we're using our student assignment slide. This does kick off the annual enrollment cycle.
And then Susan and I on the next slide will dig in a little bit more.
So what that means for us, once the product is created, is we use it for our budget development in partnership with our county partners. And we also use it for our capacity management conversations, discussions, and decisions, our CIP strategy moving forward, as well as just general resource planning as a district.
And for Wake County, the forecast outputs are used to provide context when we are evaluating our local appropriation for the upcoming year. One of the scenarios that we model is a per pupil number, along with looking at capital investments for how many new schools versus renovations may need to be evaluated in the 7-year capital plan.
So the forecast process, which will just basically review what Lindsay already shared with you with our collaborative process. It's a 3-step process that starts with the district sharing data. Once we hit that, we call it anecdotally the 20th day enrollment numbers, but that's not actually what it is. For us, it's more in the land of PMR2. When we get to that point, we use our district's student membership charter billing data, and we share that with our partners on the planning team. They then work to incorporate all of the additional demographic data that Lindsay alluded to, and then we create the forecast. So it really is this 3-step process that takes us toward the end goal. Some definitions just to remind everyone. I know we talk about these infrequently, so this is a good time to reset and redefine. ADM is just math. It's average daily membership. It's a simplistic calculation that determines based on how many kids are enrolled versus how many kids are showing up each day. Now, at some point, we take a very specific accumulation of that particular data point, and we send that over to NCDPI, and that's what determines our funding for the year. In our space, because the new ADM formula takes the best of 2 PMRs, that's very confusing for us to have multiple sets of data, so we use, for our forecasting purposes, just that second PMR, which is called the Principal's Monthly Report. It's an ADM calculation at the end of the second month of school, and that's across all of our calendars. So it's a universal date we use as a district that we call PMR2, so our year-round schools get a little bit extra time to collect that information. Different from enrollment. Enrollment is how many students are on the roster, how many chairs I need to have in a room in case every single student shows up on a given day. So for capacity management, enrollment is very important, but for funding purposes, we focus on the PMR2 because that's what's going to sort of settle the budget numbers. And then attendance violations is just a special fancy term. If I have a student who's still on the books but has had 10 consecutive days of absence, but we haven't withdrawn them yet because we're not quite sure where they're going, we will exclude them here because it doesn't look like they're a student for math purposes, but we do keep them on our enrollment roster just in case we're still working on trying to do some child find work or things like that for that particular student. So what's a forecast, Nathan?
All right, thank you so much again for having us here today.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Just want to let you know, the board members, that the presentation is on your email.
Thank you. Thank you.
Perfect. Shall I wait a few seconds for y'all to pull that up?
Go on.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, okay. So briefly, just want to tell you what a forecast is, and for those of you who have been here before, you've heard this, but for those of you who are new, a forecast, what it is and what is it? It is a scientific most likely scenario based on all of our inputs, and it can be an extremely useful planning tool if used correctly and questioned, right? What it is not a magic solution that can tell us with complete accuracy what membership or enrollment will be in 10 years. Nor is it a random or wild guess at what membership or enrollment will be in 10 years. So keep that in mind. So next slide, please. So current membership and enrollment levels, as you know, have decreased this year since last year slightly. WCPSS Principal's Monthly Report 2 membership decreased by 0.4%. Compared to what we anticipated it increasing by 0.8% this year. So there was a difference in what we projected last year and what actually we observed this year. And so what happened? Some factors that are impacting changes to ADM, including expansion of the Opportunity Scholarship Program has and will likely continue to impact educational market share in Wake County. In addition, we're experiencing some demographic uncertainty right now, and we've got declines in the foreign-born population that are historic that are likely affecting membership in Wake County Public Schools. Economic indicators do remain strong and have really no changed impact on ADM. but also live births declined in 22, 23, and that effect will likely be visible in the school, in the 27 school year. Next slide, please. So reporting school data. Let's start with attendance. So what you're looking at, next slide, please. So what you're looking at here is our primary input, which is our principal's monthly report to ADM2 trends from the 2015-2016 school year through the current school year. And you can see, if you look in the far two right columns over here, we can see we saw a dip by about 704 students in ADM2 from 24-25 to ADM2 25-26. That's that 0.4% that I'm referring to. Next slide, please. So just comparing this, just to clarify, what's happening in the broader population, although it does impact school membership, it's not directly correlated with school membership because there are other components of student membership population change. So for instance, you may have heard, Wake County is the second fastest growing county in the state between 23 and 2024. And among other comparable counties in the nation in terms of numeric population increase. Brunswick is the fastest county in terms of percent population growth. Mecklenburg is the fastest in terms of numeric growth. But what you're seeing over here, despite Wake being the second fastest growing county in the state, we also see this is our percent change in ADM year to year. And so we can see in 22-23, we dropped by 4%. We increased by 1% in 23-24, increased by 0.7% in 24-25, but then we decreased again. So there's other components of population change happening here. Next slide, please. We include this every year just so you can get a sense of how you compare to other school districts that are close in proximity and also in type and size. Wake County Public Schools saw the second smallest percent decrease of all North Carolina public schools, second only to Johnston County, right? And so compared to Franklin County Schools saw a decline of 0.5%, Harnett County Schools 0.9%, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So market share. We'll start with educational market share. What you're looking at here is the market share of non-WCPSS schools in Wake County. Two takeaways from here. Number one, Wake County's public school system still has the lion's share of the educational market share in Wake County, with about 74% of all school students, all K-12 students attending Wake County public schools. However, we can see non-WCPSS schools, the market share has increased in recent years from 19% in 24-15 to 26% in 24-25. We don't yet have the 25-26 data for homeschools and for private schools. That data will be released in the coming months. Next slide, please. One thing about the charter school membership is that regardless of how we feel about charter schools, we have really good data on charter schools because we know exactly, because they bill directly to Wake County. And so we work with this district on their charter billing. One thing of note here, so when charter school expansion started in 2015, 2016, and you can see just every year thereafter, the number of students attending charter schools that were residents of Wake County increased every single year except for last year, right? So for the first time since charter school expansion in 2015, 2016, we've seen a slight decline in charter school enrollment, which likely means that charter schools are also being affected by private school voucher expansion and these changes in migration. The same forces that are affecting WCPSS student membership are affecting charter school membership. And this is unique because this is the first time, again, since charter school expansion that we've seen a decrease in charter school membership. So briefly incorporating some additional demographic data. We look at economic indicators. Next slide. So unemployment in Wake County has stayed relatively stable for the last several years. So the impact has not really changed. So we're not worried about unemployment and those economic indicators. Next slide. Home sales in Wake County have also been comparable to post-pandemic years this past year, so there's not a big change in how that's affecting ADM, but we still factor it in. Next slide, please. So migration. Next slide. So, I'm sorry, can you go back one? I didn't see you change. Okay, so we, as I mentioned earlier on, as a nation overall and in North Carolina, we're experiencing perhaps the most demographic uncertainty that we have in recent memory. Migration, foreign-born migration in particular, has seen the sharpest decline as a nation for the first time in 50 years. And so the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office at the federal level has adjusted their population forecasts down as a result of this rapid decline starting in 2025 in the foreign-born migration. In October of 25, I believe, September of October, they adjusted it down, and then they adjusted it down again in January of this year. And I think, Chris, if I'm not mistaken, they adjusted the net overall 2035 projections down by 7.5 million fewer new U.S. residents. That's a lot of people. Next slide, please. Net migration into North Carolina, as you probably heard on the news, when the state level population estimates from July 1, 2025 were recently released earlier this year. North Carolina was the third fastest growing state in both numeric population change and also percent change. We added, as a state overall, between July 1, 24 and July 1, 25, we added 130,954 new residents approximately. But it's important to note that we added about 35,000 fewer residents than we did the year before. And so all of that was due to a decline in the estimate of foreign-born net migrants. And this is the same demographic factors that are shaping the population forecast for the nation overall. So we don't have, in the data that we have available to us, we don't necessarily have the nativity of each student in terms of whether they're foreign-born or U.S.-born, and we certainly don't have that data available for their parents. So what we do have is a proxy, is English language learners. It's not perfect, and that needs to be made clear, but it is a proxy. And lots of school districts across the state, including Wake County, in the 25-26 year compared to 24-25, saw a sharp decline in English language learner students, which indicates that perhaps this overall decline in the foreign-born migration is affecting WCPSS student membership. Next slide, please. All right, now I'll turn it over to my colleague Chris at DAA.
Thank you so much, Nathan. And, just want to reiterate a little bit of what Nathan was saying there. In a prior life, I was a statistician at the Census Bureau, estimating international migration. It's a very hard thing to do for the United States, but they've been doing a very good job trying to get a kind of beat on what's going on. And I will say their data lag, right? So we won't know the full impact of this until probably the next series of estimates are released next year. So just to keep that in mind of the amount of lack of information that we have right now. So I want to start out on this idea of how we create our forecasts. We use something called the grade progression or cohort change ratio methodology. And this is basically, it's pretty simple in theory. The idea is you're looking at, let's say, to forecast second graders next year, you're looking at how many first graders we had in year one, how many second graders we had in year two, and that ratio should be, if it's right around 1, you have 100 who are in first grade, and then next year you have 100 who are in second grade. If the number's higher, students are moving in or changing the type of school that they're going to. If it's lower, vice versa, they're either moving out or they're changing their market share. The only caveat to that is for kindergarten. Obviously, we don't have somewhere to cohort change them into, so we look at births, and we look at births 5 years prior. So we're looking at those expected 5-year-olds. So what we want to look at here, it's the hardest chart that we ever look at because we're looking at time in two different ways. The yellow line are births, and they are lagged 5 years. So if you're looking at that red line, even though it's the 25-26 school year, sorry, I forgot that there were, yes. That is the births for 2020 to 2021, even though, next slide, Down here, we have the school year for 25, 26. So really, we're comparing, kind of trying to compare apples to apples, kindergartners to births when they have been aged forward. And so what we're generally looking at is if we had students moving in, that blue line would be higher than the yellow line. Or if we have students who are either moving out or choosing other market share options, that number is lower than the yellow line. So what we have seen is since the pandemic, that number, that ratio, has hovered a little bit lower than it was pre-pandemic, a little below 90%, basically. So 90% of births turn into kindergartners 5 years later is kind of what we're looking at. So next slide. So what does this, that together with the other grade progression ratios we're creating, what does that mean for our forecast? What you're going to see in this slide is our forecast this year in the light blue, the forecast from 2024, so last year, in the yellow, and the forecast for the year before that in the dark blue. And so what we have here is we're forecasting increase at a slower rate than we have in the past 2 years. And this has to do with exactly what Nathan was talking about, changes in migration and in market share. Next slide, please. But this happens in other ways, and this is why it's very important that we update these forecasts each year, because things change on the ground over time. So for instance, in 2020, we were comparing the estimates or the forecasts that were created in 2020, 2019, and 2018 and had similar patterns. In 2022, we were dealing with something similar. Again, a lot of this was due to COVID-era patterns. Next slide, please. So going back to kind of key takeaway here, slightly slower growth this year, but at the end of the day, the majority of Wake County students are still attending those WC PSS schools. With that, I will pass it back to Susan.
So yay, 74% of the market is coming to Wake County schools. So I think that's something that we always want to celebrate, is that we're doing a really, really good job of maintaining the vast majority of the market. The changes that you see from 2014 to 2024 are largely due to the increased number of seats available in charter programs, as well as behavior changes post-COVID. But we do seem to be leveling off. We look at this as somewhat encouraging, but we also don't want to, we never want to rest on our laurels. We have good work to do. We've talked a lot in different aspects with you all about how we need to continue to tell our story and continue to be a welcoming place for all students so that everyone continues to see us, to use Ms. Caulfield's language, the first choice. In the district. So that's the good news. And then some key takeaways for us, particularly since we're in Facilities Committee, if you'll go to the next slide, is we understand, I think it's been made clear, I think we've said it about 3 or 4 times, that the changes in our foreign-born immigration are going to continue to impact the district. We just need to continue to monitor those trends, both nationally, at the state level, and of course, here regionally. The changes in the Opportunity Scholarship Program are going to likely impact our district, so we just need to continue to monitor how that impacts our total enrollment. The distribution of our growth throughout the county, which we'll talk about more in future sessions, still does highlight the need for some new schools, but maybe not as many as we've needed in the preceding 10 to 20 years. And the overall forecast is going to support what this committee has been striving for, which is to put more effort into renovating our existing square footage versus adding as much square footage as we've had to add ever since the growth patterns as we're going along. And as we all know, the class size legislation change that happened right in the middle of all of that high growth really kind of forced our hand into needing to add square footage to accommodate particularly elementary students in the district. But it seems like now we'll still need to put a few new schools in, particularly in the east, but we can sort of use this evidence to support the facility committee's work of trying to emphasize renovations. Dr. Ng, I think that's us.
Okay. On the agenda is addressing utilization concern. Is that part of this?
Just the next conversation with Melissa and I.
Okay, all right. So any questions from the board? Ms. Edmonds?
You said it, Ms. Pulliam, at the end of your comments just now. I wanted to say that if we're going to discuss silver linings, while these trends are upsetting to me, and I appreciate that we still educate 74% of Wake County students, but it's still to see that trend going down, and as y'all know, I have many, many thoughts and opinions about charters and voucher schools. However, a silver lining that I see, and again, you said it, is the opportunity, if we don't have to build so many new schools, the opportunity to really lean in and invest in our renovations. And I know we've got budget challenges ahead, I'm aware of that, but it's still, if we're talking, you know, a 5-10-year forecast, I think that's a great time to seize that opportunity to take care of some of our, you know, older campuses.
I totally agree. Any other thoughts? No? Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
So from here, the information gets shared back with the county commissioners group, and then they'll partner together with our budget teams to use some of this information for budgeting purposes. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll have Melissa and Glenn to join us for our next discussion.
I emailed you all the upcoming site next. I don't know what. Do you have it?
I think they're just
Yeah, I don't know what the glitch is because some people log in and they haven't.
No, there's a conversation
before I
called,
did.
there's a conversation called addressing utilization concerns. It's supposed to be point 9.
So did you send it to everybody?
I did.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Apologize for that.
I don't know what it is. Goes to the machine?
Yeah, I just go back and look at stuff sometimes.
All right, go ahead.
Before we get started on this particular discussion, we want to acknowledge that this is a change in how we have this discussion. Normally, we come to you with a slate of recommendations based on our analysis of underutilized schools, and then, per your suggestion, go out and talk to the community and get some feedback. We're going to reverse that. We're going to talk to you today about which schools we think could benefit from a change of some sort, and then we're going to talk to the community before we even make any specific recommendations. So you might think of this as calendar conversions is usually what comes out of this discussion, but there could potentially, in the future, be other things that come out of it. So we're going to have an initial discussion with you today to address utilization concerns, and per the board's request, we're looking out to the 28-29 school year. So this is to give families, particularly if we're talking about a calendar change, and staff, and plenty of time to adjust to and prepare for any changes that you might approve. Our goals for today are to review the process that we used so that you can know how we got to the short list. We're going to also review which schools we think, I'm going to use every conditional word I know, maybe, might, perhaps, possibly, could, maybe benefit from a calendar change. And then we're going to review our next steps in the process. Of course, all of this aligns with Board Policy 4150, particularly Section A1D and operational efficiency, where we're trying to minimize our under-enrolled schools, minimize our overcrowded schools, as well as, of course, maximizing our transportation efficiencies. And as it aligns with our our strategic plan and the family and community engagement goals, particularly AIM 6 and AIM 14, to make sure that we are providing clear and accessible information to our families, and that we're building strong relationships, not only among our families, but of course with our staff. And our equity-focused practices. It's not always clear to people outside this room, but underutilized schools and overcrowded schools do not always provide equitable opportunities for the students in those schools. We do a much better job when everybody's in that ideal operational size, not only for being able to offer appropriate programming, but space for programming, and even as allotments go, to make sure that we have the resources available for every student in the room. And then we're going to set the facilities committee if we didn't show the alignment to our effective operations services and facilities goals, particularly AIMS 16, 17, 19, and 20. So, to give you the point in time where this is where that overlap is happening, we've already had one conversation with you to say we've kicked off public engagement for the 27-28 plan, but we're now coming to you on the very last step of the 26-27 plan, which is what could not have been managed through the enrollment plan, what wasn't addressed or needs continued attention beyond the capping of schools, what else do we need to be looking at as a district to better utilize our facilities. So as you look at items 1, 2, and 3, what we've done already as staff is reviewed the cap list. We've identified the schools not operating on a multi-track that could benefit. We also are looking at our schools that are operating on a multi-track year-round that maybe don't have long-term crowding concerns. So we've completed this step as staff. We're going to share with you the results of that work. Next, we will be hosting those engagement sessions, and then eventually we'll be bringing you specific recommendations. Our website that has the assignment planning information has great links for our community, so if they just continue to go to that website, but maybe highlight step 6, that'll give them some of the information where they'll be able to find the information we're sharing with you today, as well as information on upcoming public engagement opportunities. So for the process, we'll just do a quick run through, but I want to show you some new information. So this is what you just saw moments ago, so that's why this presentation came second. So with our new forecast showing that we're going to have slower rates of growth than were originally projected, we feel like this is a good opportunity to reevaluate our schools that maybe are particularly multi-track and underutilized to determine whether or not that is a good thing for those schools long-term. So this is what is now the spatial distribution model based on the recent forecast. So brand new map. You'll notice the comparison here. Last year when we had a slightly more aggressive projected enrollment growth in the out years, you saw more of those sort of large blue arrows pointing in the up direction throughout the district. You're still seeing a concentration of those, particularly in the east and the far west and southwest, but you're seeing a little bit more stabilization in the middle. So I do want to let everybody know this is a percent change in enrollment growth assessment. So a red arrow doesn't necessarily mean less students, it means less growth. So if I typically had 10 students and then I had 12 students, I might now just go from 10 to 10. It's not necessarily a reduction in total student population in these areas, it just means they're not growing as rapidly as they once did. So as I shared earlier, stay for a moment, in my key takeaways on the forecast, you can see that we probably are still going to need to find some new seats in the district, usually in the form of a new school out toward the east, and you've already got one school approved in that area, but we probably won't need as many across the district as we once did. We're going to update this for you in a future presentation, so this is just the next thing we're going to do after this presentation, and the one from the moments ago is to kind of assess what these projections are doing for our crowding across the district, so we'll be using those for our 27-28 assessment. And then, of course, you're going to be talking about the executive summary and the potential bonds. So this will be updated once any final decisions are made about which new schools we're going to be constructing across the district in the next 7 years, as well as which schools are going to have those major renovations. And the reason those are important to us is because we also think about where do they add seats. So if a major renovation adds some capacity at the school, that can be impactful for some of our crowding concerns. We talked about this momentarily with you just last week about the public engagement for the enrollment plan, just reminding you where everything fits in that 6-step process. And then step 5, you already had this conversation in February for the 26-27 cycle, so it's just to remind you, these are schools with continuing caps. However, some of these are in areas that are having stabilization of growth, so it may be that we're working away from it. I do want to highlight, however, some of these schools are going to be very proximate to some of the schools we're going to talk about today. So we do have ways to maybe relieve the crowding at these schools and maintain a multi-track year-round at a school that's under-enrolled. So we're going to try to figure out what's the right solution. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but just kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about this list of schools. And then our next slide, so again, this is where we are today. So just a couple of reminders. We had a conversation with you earlier when we talked about CAP schools, looking at our overcrowded schools. So the CAP schools are the schools where, as a district, we've agreed, and you as a board have agreed, they're so over-enrolled, or the enrollment that's coming is so rapid that we need to establish a cap total for that school, and it is possible that if a family new moves into that area, they may be sent to an overflow school or an alternate school. They are given bus transportation, they're treated like a base student at that school, but they can't go to the one that's designated for their address. Crowded schools are those schools that we're monitoring and watching to make sure that they're not pushing toward that need for a CAP school, and so that we're just keeping an eye on those to make sure that we don't need to take further action on them. Underutilized schools, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about when we talked about CAP schools because they're more relevant to this conversation. For this cycle, we've identified them as schools that have room to grow and that are operating below 85%, which could potentially affect the academic programs they're able to deliver, as well as also our operational efficiency goals. Next slide. So just as a quick reminder, the things that matter when it comes to enrollment management considerations are class size legislation, projected enrollment growth in the area, and of course, capacity restrictions. We can come back to any of these if you'd like, but I know you've seen these recently, so I don't want to spend too much time on them. In addition, when we talked about the overcrowded schools, we talked about one way that we could add capacity is to make a school multi-track year-round. It's, I don't want to say a no cost, but it is a low-cost option to add capacity at a school that doesn't require any construction, but it does obviously disrupt families and staff as they're trying to figure out how to manage those new calendars. But it can add anywhere from 25 to 33% capacity at a particular school based on how it's configured. We talked about all the others when we talked about overcrowded schools, but I just wanted to say that that adding capacity piece would be relevant to today's conversation. Next slide. When we had this conversation with you, when we were talking about capped and overcrowded schools, we identified that the schools here are the ones that are kind of on that overcrowded watch list. Right now, we don't feel that these schools, other than Lake Myra, would need to go full multi-track. Lake Myra, you already approved, it's set to go multi-track with the coming school year so that it can serve more students in its area, but the other schools we're continuing to monitor, assess, do site visits, look at the growth patterns in the region to determine if either reassignments or waiting are the right option for these schools. We don't believe at this time that these schools should be considered for multi-track. The other opportunities we have when we're looking at underutilized schools that are a little bit different. We could look at relieving overcrowded schools in the region. We could determine whether or not they're just already in a great spot to prepare for new growth, and we do have a few of those. We could encourage choice into these schools. Our magnet program's history really was founded on this concept, that our city schools were under-enrolled post-merger, and by having high-quality magnet programs there, we could draw students in to help fill those seats. So that's one thing that we do. Another is looking at calendars, looking at program enhancements. What are things we could do to encourage and incentivize choice into some of our under-enrolled schools? When it gets to the operational side of the house, how do we reduce the capacity of the school? Do they have excess trailers that we could maybe remove and that would help sort of solve the issue and they could just fit within their main campus and actually be okay? Or are they running a multi-track year-round calendar and maybe no longer need to do so? They don't need all the extra capacity that the 4 tracks provide, and they can serve their families either on a single track or on a traditional calendar. So we're going to emphasize that point in today's discussion. So just as a review of how we look at this internally, when we're looking at our underutilized schools, it's not exactly a stepwise, like we'd love for it to be a perfect, we look at this and then we look at this and it's like a set of funnels. But every time I did that, I found an exception to the funnel, right? So first, we look for projected growth. Is it simply a new school that's serving a new group of students and it's just aging into its new population? Then fine, we can sort of eliminate that from discussion. There's growth in the region, that school was built for a reason, it's getting ready to fill up. Your brand new schools like Pleasant Plains Elementary, a recently opened school like Woods Creek Elementary, you know, those types of schools, Rexford even. Are there nearby schools that could use some crowding relief? Can we go ahead and, as much as it's disruptive to do reassignment, we could at least maintain the buildings, maintain the calendars, and you've given us license to sort of continue to recommend generous stability transfers, so that gives families the option to stay at their current school while we're working to move the population over to the school that has space. I mentioned earlier, do they have mobile units? Are the mobile units necessary? Is it creating a false sense of underutilization because I have a group of trailers that aren't necessarily needed or temporary classrooms, and if we were to simply take those off of the campus, the facility utilization score would actually go up because we would be using the facility itself. So that's something, and you heard a presentation, Glenn, I think you co-presented that earlier, where we are actively making strides to take some of those things into consideration. So then we're left with these last two. So the schools you're going to see today are the ones that are not in an area that are serving projected growth. Maybe could handle the nearby crowding, but we're not sure. We want to have some conversations with the community to determine what's the right path. Mobile units have already been assessed. We're already taking care of those, and we continue to manage those as we can. And then calendar optimization. Do we have schools that are continuing to operate on a multi-track year-round school calendar that perhaps don't need that for capacity purposes? Program adjustment is a space we've not really been in, and I'm not sure we're there yet, but is it a matter of, does this building need to be used for something different? Is the district ready to consider using this site for some other purpose if it's no longer needed for its original purpose? We obviously had those conversations in the 70s and 80s when we had the merger. We had schools that had program adjustments, some that were even sold, to other entities. I don't think we're there today, but I just wanted to put that on there, that is a tool that's in the toolbox for a district our size. So should we need to leverage that? We do have a task force that's working on conversations around that kind of idea. I just don't know that we're there yet, right? We're not shrinking as a district by any stretch. Next slide. So looking at that same array of choices, kind of ranked, if there's projected growth in the region, that's the least disruptive option. Just let the school continue to fill, right? So that's a nice option for families because it doesn't require assignment changes, it doesn't require calendar changes, it doesn't even require facilities changes. As we go down the slide, the next one would be the need for nearby crowding relief. Go ahead. They're going to go one at a time. So the need for the nearby crowding relief, we can look at those. That'll come up through our assignment plan. So if we have conversations related to this that might impact the 27-28 or 28-29 or 29-30 plan, continuing to look at the mobile units and then, of course, the calendar impact. The calendar impact, we as an office, based on recent conversations, have determined from the community's perspective and even from the staff's perspective is perhaps the most disruptive option on the list. Because it changes the way families do business. It changes the way staff are paid or compensated in some cases. It changes the way that a school community functions. Your PTA has set things up this way for the different tracks, and while it may be easier operationally, it's just a huge cultural shift for a school to go from being multi-track to being traditional or single track or vice versa. Taking mobile units off, bit of a non-event, right? Changing the, and I noticed, I just want you to know that step 2, being in the role, and then also thinking about the enrollment plan, yes, changing schools can be disruptive for families, but with the generous stability rules that we've been able to use the last several years, is actually less disruptive in practicality than changing the calendar of a school, because once you change it, it's changed. Right? And then, of course, monitoring and assessing is always part of our process. So with that, let's get to the list. So before we talk to you about which schools we're considering, we just want to tell you that this is where we're at, is looking at that step 4, the impact of the calendar optimization. And we just want to kind of put it out there. If we're going to reduce the number of tracks at a multi-track year-round school to a single track, generally in our district it's been track 4, it would require families and staff to adjust their family calendars. It requires some staff to evaluate potential salary changes, because we do have staff at those schools that are on a 12-month payment that wouldn't be otherwise. And they also get 12 paid checks, regardless of what track they're on, and they would convert to 10, right? So just having to money manage and prepare for that type of shift. But it does allow the flexibility to return to multi-track should it be needed when enrollment growth returns. Lake Myra is a perfect example. It opened as a multi-track, was reduced to track 4, now it's bouncing back up to multi-track because the growth has finally come into the region to support that. So that is the benefit there. If we change it from multi-track to traditional, same first 2 bullets, right? We've got to think about the changing of schedules for families and staff and the potential salary changes. But in our history, once we've gone down to traditional, we haven't really come back to that school and said, let's make it multi-track. I'm not saying it's not an option, but it's a heavier lift to go from traditional to multi-track. Next slide. And then we monitor and assess. All right, we're ready. Let's rip the band. Let's get to 33. Slide 33. So going into the 28-29 school year, this is, again, a list that might possibly, perhaps, could benefit from a reduction in tracks. We're not saying we're making any recommendations today. In fact, it is our estimation that this list will be shorter when we come to see you on April 14th. But we wanted to just alert you that we're going to engage these communities. We're going to talk with them about the potential impacts on their family as staff, things we should consider about the unique perspectives for these particular schools and communities. And then we'll bring back official recommendations on April 14th. The 2 schools in the northeastern area are Heritage Elementary and Heritage Middle. The 4 schools in what is our southern area by area superintendent, some might consider it southwest, are Holly Grove Elementary, Holly Grove Middle, Holly Springs Elementary, Rex Road Elementary. And in the northwest area, it's Briar Creek Elementary, Carpenter Elementary, Morrisville Elementary, Pleasant Grove Elementary, and Sycamore Creek Elementary. So let's dive into a little bit of information to kind of help you see how these schools got to this point. The orange arrow that you're seeing at the top of the slide points to the percent crowding with trailers on the multi-track year-round calendar for the current 25-26 school year based on the reported ADL. Do I need to say any of those pieces again? Okay. So Heritage Elementary, with its trailer complement, is currently operating just below 74%, and Heritage Middle just below 78%. Heritage Middle does not have any trailers on the campus, so we knew that that wasn't an option. And with the two schools being co-located on the same site, we felt like we had to engage the entire community to have these discussions to determine what the impact would be. You can also see in the far right column, prior to even this current forecast, both schools have experienced approximately a 10% decline in enrollment over the last 5 years. These are schools that are not operating a track 2, and as we talk with our area superintendents and our principals, that's kind of the first sign that a multi-track year-round school may not necessarily need to continue as a 4-track school if they don't have the student population to support all 4 tracks. And so that's just a point of information. Next slide. So we won't go through each of these, but I want to kind of show you how these blocks are, because that way you can read these on your own. But we're going to give you information about whether or not they're operating track 2. We're giving you information about what's going on with the mobile units on their site. We're letting you know whether or not there's enrollment growth in the area. We're giving you some information about the feeder patterns, which again shows the relationship between the two schools. And then just being mindful, one thing I really need this group to consider as we move forward is at the middle school level, if it's a multi-track year-round middle school, it needs a healthy group of multi-track year-round elementary schools feeding into it to be able to balance the tracks as they come in to 6th and then 7th and then 8th grade. So if we have a school like these two and we say, well, let's go track 4, keep in mind that Heritage Middle is also fed into by Jones Dairy, which needs to remain on multi-track, and that would create a really challenging situation to try to put all siblings on track 4. It's just physically not possible across those two campuses. So it may be that if we feel like track reduction is needed in this area, at the middle school level in particular, middle schools we might recommend traditional calendar. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is just that track alignment. The other is equity reasons. If a school like a middle school with all of their after-school sports and clubs and activities is operating on even multi-track or track 4, anytime there's activities happening during the track outs, the students who require that bus service can't get to school because there's no buses running on those days. And if I'm a track 2 student and I'm tracked out, I can't get on the bus because I'm not supposed to be at school, so I have to find my own way to school. So we do have some participation concerns from an equity lens at the middle school level in particular, just because most of their activities and after-school sports are aligned to the traditional calendar. So just something to think about.
And our previous recommendations, going back to Rollsville Middle and Pine Hollow, went to traditional, so it gave you the 6-12 alignment for families. While K-3 class size forces us to continue to use multi-track at the elementary level, if we can provide stability for families 6-12, that's why we would make a recommendation for a middle school to be on traditional instead of track 4.
But at this point, no recommendations being made today. But just letting you know as we move forward, that's something we really have to think about at the middle school level in particular. Next slide. In the Northwestern area, you'll see the same type of information for each of these schools. That's how they got onto this list. Pleasant Grove, I'll call out because this was an experiment. This was a school where we had a sort of large reassignment out and into the school to help relieve the crowding at area kept schools, Alston Ridge Elementary and Parkside, which we just were able to take the caps off because of this change. In response to the parent requests, we converted Pleasant Grove from traditional to multi-track so the families could stay on those same calendars as they migrated to the new school. But as you can see, it's just not filling. And it's making it very difficult to have equitable programming, specials, enhance, even like, instructional assistants, intervention services, all those types of things are very difficult to have across all 4 tracks when you're at this level of enrollment. And you'll see on to the right, Briar Creek is the only one on the list that's actually showing positive enrollment growth over the last several years. However, it does have a pretty broad attendance area. So if it was the decision of the board to convert Briar Creek to either a single track or traditional, we would most likely need to address some assignment areas in between now and the time that took effect. So just kind of throwing that out there, and that is possible in this region. And you'll see the same information for each of the schools on the following slides. And Sycamore has benefited, obviously, by the opening of Barton Pond. It's finally settled. All the stability transfers have kind of aged forward. So this school, by 28, 29, seems like it would be able to be accommodated on a single track if that was what the board decided. The next group of schools are in the southern or southwestern area and kind of in the Holly Springs community. Again, a school that, an area, sorry. Stop. Rex Road is one we want to draw your attention to on this list. It's a brand-new school. We just opened this school year. So for this school year, it's been trying to do all 4 tracks, particularly in K-3, and trying to grow. This area's permitting and residential development has slowed from the original projections for the area. So it doesn't need to be multi-track right now. It's kind of a lesson that we learned with Hilltop. That's why we recommended that Hilltop be opened as a track 4 school, so that we could be prepared to absorb the growth and go multi-track when time came. Rex is in that position. The only challenge for Rex is we've always had an unwritten rule that we try not to impact families more frequently than every 3 years. And so if you were to move forward with some type of a calendar change for 28, 29, that would actually be year 3 of the school's operation. So just something to weigh and consider as we're talking about this region. You see a middle school on this list as well, so again, we'd have to have those really detailed, in-depth conversations about track 4 versus traditional if we were to move forward with the track reduction. And you'll see the information on the schools on the following slides. So just to let you know where we're at now, so the next steps and timeline, since there are no official recommendations being made today, we wanted to let you know that our district website and the calendar conversions page that kind of partners with this are being updated now. Families are receiving emails right now inviting them to our virtual information sessions and to participate in regional thought exchanges. We're separating them so we can get that regional community perspective versus a whole district look, as well as staff. So we'll have all of that going on between March 10th and April 5th. You'll see that the specific sessions and their dates and times are listed here because they are open to the public since they're virtual sessions. The links will be on our main website as well as included in messaging that's coming not only from us, but also from the principals of the schools in the area. So we want to let families know, if you're receiving that email, please come, please attend, please participate in the thought exchange because we really want to know, you're okay, go ahead. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. It's fine. Yeah, we really want to know, what the unique perspectives of each community are before the planning team comes with very specific final recommendations. And so those recommendations we're going to prepare to have for you at the April 14th Facilities Committee meeting. Next slide. This is where we just need a little bit of advice. We would just trying to get people information as close to 2 years in advance as possible. We'd like for you to make this decision sometime in May, and you don't have to decide today. By the time we get to April 14th, staff will have recommendations. If we want to do one more round of virtual information sessions, we can do that. That's not a problem. We're prepared to do that. You'll obviously have board meetings where people can come speak for public comment. We would then want to finalize the recommendations from staff's perspective at your May 5th work session. We just aren't sure if you'd feel comfortable going straight into the board meeting that same evening and taking a vote, or if you'd want to wait until the next board meeting to take the vote, and we can take that under advisement. But this is our proposed timeline. And then once any final decisions that are made from May to September, we'll work to see if anything needs to be included in the 27-28 enrollment plan to prepare for any of these calendar adjustments. And then, of course, throughout the next couple of years, we'll work with the principals and the communities to support them in preparing for the changes.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation and just full transparency to the community. And for the sake of time, I want to have substantive questions right now. If you have any other questions kind of in detail about your specific school, I would ask that you guys email Glenn specifically. And also, I'm sure that we will be receiving emails from concerned parents over the next couple of months. So we would welcome, conversations with them as well as engaging them to go through the thought exchange.
Please do.
And we'll make sure you all have links to the thought exchange so you can see the comments as they're coming in.
Correct.
I can email them.
Okay. Dr. Joe?
Mine, I've been talking to you about a specific school, and I won't bring that up, but how nimble are these plans? Like, how far in advance would you have to know in order to make more substantive changes, like you're talking about, like a program change that we never really do, but if we did, but if we wanted to turn a single-track school multi-track, if you wanted a traditional school multi-track, how far in advance would you have to start that kind of work?
Yeah, based on the board's guidance and Lynn's really worked to shape this is the time to do it 2 years in advance, right?
Okay.
So we are using our traditional operational assessment tools to say, is it overcrowded, is it under-enrolled, to bring those recommendations to you, because we have, as a district, sort of clarified that we're only using it for capacity purposes, the calendars anyway. Programs, I think, would take a little bit more time, only because if you're going to change the entire function of a school, I think the community would need more time to weigh in on that, to think about that. Staff would need more time. I would argue that that probably would take longer and would come from a different, it could spin out of this process as we redefine and develop. We just haven't done, we haven't been there.
And we can extend the timeline longer. 2 years is probably the shortest that we would want to have that decision, because, like we had shared, there are changes in the way that staff get paid. And so we want to make sure that they have 2 full calendar cycles to either look for a different position, but then also adjust for that change in pay. But so 2 years would be your shortest, but you can extend that as long as you'd like.
And we've done it 1 year before and it's worked, but it's not preferable.
Of all the changes and levers that we use to address crowding concerns, the calendar change, as you know, is the most disruptive and the most difficult for families and staff.
Right. But the one we've talked about is being part of this conversation, too?
It's,
Okay.
yes.
Ms. Caulfield?
Just a quick question. I see the dates that you have for the area, in my area in particular, it's March 18th, the same day as the Board of Commissioners, so we can't do both. Will this be?
Yes, we will record the sessions and post them to the website, and I'll make sure that we copy the respective board members on all the communications we're sending to families.
So this one in particular is my area, not particular school. The families go to the school. The
Right, I think it's kind of a boundary that's shared, I believe, with you
So
and
if you
Dr.
could just
Ng.
include me in that.
Absolutely,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Ms. Rice?
The choice is May, 9th and
I think May 5th and 19th are your board meetings, so,
Right.
yeah.
I don't know if we were going to do a thumbs up, thumbs down to give some type of thought process.
You can make that decision in April if you'd like as well. There's no-
I just prefer if you give us the information. I don't necessarily like voting on it the same night, because it's
Thank you
just,
for that.
Yeah,
it's just, for me, it's too
we
much.
thought that too, but we just wanted to give you the option.
Give me a minute.
I agree. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
One last item, it'll be quick. One last item. It will be quick because
Thank
we've
you.
already seen it.
Is this the CIP?
Should you guys-
On Assembly?
Sorry?
Is this the one that's on Assembly, since the other ones?
Yes.
Executive
Okay.
summary, yes. And this is Mark Kearney, Director of Program Controls. As mentioned, you've already seen the presentation. We did provide it at the February 10th Facilities Committee meeting, and we had already talked to board members prior to that in individual small group meetings. Go ahead, next slide. And we'll just jump to the executive summary, the spreadsheet right there. So this is new schools, and right now there is no change with the new schools component of the executive summary. Go ahead, next slide. This is the existing schools. Again, this is the same as we presented last month. We do have a change, and that's coming up on the next slide. And under program requirements, funding summary, good news is the county was able to provide a little bit more money. And what we have proposed is that to be under PREMP, which is partial renovations and improvements. This next slide that I have really highlights the change. And so fiscal year '28, they were able to add $172,311. And then in fiscal year '29, we were able to add $172,310.
And then the years after that, it's just an inflation factor, for those years. So over the 6 years, that amounts to over $1 million, and that's fantastic. We do certainly appreciate, the positive direction with that change. Go to the next one. So this slide does also reflect the change in the program requirement subtotal and the CIP total at the bottom. And next slide. And these you've seen before. These are definitions. I know that was very quick. We just had really the one change. And if you have any questions, we're certainly happy to answer them.
Well, I appreciate any funds increase and allow us to focus on our existing schools, right? Any questions, thoughts? All right, if I don't see any more questions, I don't have any new agenda items, so I guess we will adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.